Call the November 17th Plan Commission meeting order. Mr. Martinez, please call the roll.
Mayor Olson,
Yep.
Commissioner Hogan is absent. Commissioner Butthart is absent. Commissioner Haley is absent. City Engineer Morrow.
Here.
Alderwoman Sherry Henneman.
Here.
Commissioner Patrick Leon.
Here.
For quorum and any possible voting purposes, the mayor will act, the chairman will vote with the membership. With that, we have a quorum. Please rise and join the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible,
With liberty and justice for all.
First item on the agenda is approval of the regular meeting minutes for November 30 and additions or corrections. Hanneman and Morrow. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Next item is a public hearing. We have no public hearings. It's a business matter on the Unified Development Ordinance. Actually, stuff we went over last time, but Mr. Martinez.
Yeah, good evening, Plan Commission members. This is a follow-up of the informative session that we have in the last Plan Commission meeting. So this evening, we'll have the Rubin Shell and Jackie Wells from House 11 to present the Articles 5 and 6, the General Development Standards and Design Standards. Then I will pass to Rubin or Jackie.
Great. Thank you, Regulo. I will begin sharing my screen here. Is everyone able to see my screen?
Yep.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, commissioners, and it's good to be back here to review the next sections of the Unified Development Ordinance with the group. I'm Rubin Shell. I'm joined with my colleague here, Jackie Wells, to review the next sections of the draft Unified Development Ordinance rewrite this evening. JB Hines will be unable to join us, unfortunately, this evening. However, we'll answer any questions related to the landscape standards that we can, and we'll forward any questions that need her expertise to her following the meeting. So just a quick note on the agenda tonight. We'll give a quick overview of the process and dive right into Articles 5 and 6, the two drafts of those articles. The Plan Commission, as Regulo noted, was able to provide comment on the two drafts of those articles on November 3rd. So we'll discuss those comments and perhaps get into how we'll incorporate those or into the drafts or ask some follow-up questions that'll help clarify the revisions that are needed. And then we'll go over next steps in the process. So to touch real quickly on where we're at in the overall UDO rewrite process, we're at step 4 here in this workflow, draft UDO sections and review meetings. We're reviewing actual draft text of the Unified Development Ordinance and reviewing that together with the city. That's following our step 3 there, the current UDO diagnosis and recommendations phase that we did up front and went over all our recommendations for the UDO rewrite. So the overall structure of the Unified Development Ordinance, we've seen this before, 12 articles to the proposed UDO structure here. Tonight, we're going to focus on Articles 5, General Development Standards, 6, Sign Standards. Just those two draft articles. There are some remaining questions on the first three articles, the first four, in fact, that we will circle back on at a later meeting, and we'll resolve those remaining issues that should be discussed still. But for tonight, we'll just focus on the drafts of these two articles. So an overview, now we'll just give a quick overview and get into discussion on Articles 5 and 6. Article 5, there's 11 different subsections to this. This is general development standards. So this article covers regulations that govern the physical development of properties in the city of Franklin, regardless of where they're at and which zoning district they're in the city. So it begins with off-street parking and driveways, moves into landscaping and landscaping for off-street parking areas, screening for different site elements, covers fencing. Section 9 covers different design standards for multifamily and non-residential uses. And finally, outdoor lighting and vision clearance areas around roadway intersections. So the first subsection of Article 5 is off-street parking and loading. This contains all of the regulations pertaining to the quantity of off-street parking required and its design, where it can be located on a given parcel, and just what it can look like. So to go over the main revisions we've made to the city's existing standards that are in the draft the commission has, we've revised the parking minimum that exists now to a parking maximum, specifies the maximum quantity of parking proposed per land use. We've added new requirements for vehicular cross-access between adjacent properties so that vehicles can cross and traverse between adjacent non-residential properties without going back out onto a main road. We've added standards to require bicycle parking for different land uses. That's to require bicycle parking spaces at a rate of 5% of the vehicle parking that's provided on site, up to a maximum of 10 spaces total that would be required on any given site. We've added pedestrian circulation standards. These are proposed to be required for all buildings and between all buildings and rights of way for multifamily, mixed use, and non-residential development. And we've also drafted text to require electric vehicle charging stations. And those would be required at a rate of 1 space for every 25 off-street parking spaces in the RMF, the multifamily residential district, and 1 per every 50 off-street vehicular parking spaces in the other commercial and mixed use districts. So new requirements for electric vehicle charging stations.
Good question.
Next, yes, Mr. Mayor.
It's Commissioner Morrow.
So I appreciate why we've gone from minimum parking to maximum parking. Sometimes that creates, landscape of, a sea of parking that rarely gets used. Having said that, we do have some instances where that's presented a problem where they didn't provide enough parking. And I noticed there's several, pretty much all throughout here, we talk about off-street parking, but it would be nice to see somewhere thou shalt not use on-street parking as to account for what you need. I'm thinking of like Statesman's Way. We have people trying to park there, and it's, days like today when we're trying to plow snow, it's really tough because people who live there apparently are depending on parking on the street. And I'm not sure how that happened with our old standards, but I do appreciate that, you know, we don't want to create seas of asphalt that never get used, but it kind of bothers me that we don't really consider the locations, and maybe we do want to exceed the maximum in some circumstance. So I appreciate why we went this way, but then there are some situations where I think that's going to present some problems.
hmm
How do you
Okay,
fix
yeah, that is certainly a good comment. Commissioner Morrell, I think, so one of the provisions we do have drafted in the text currently is to allow the zoning administrator to approve an increase in the maximum standard above the rate that's specified, the maximum rate that's specified if the additional spaces are surfaced with pervious pavement that wouldn't add to the overall level of imperviousness and contribute to stormwater issues and things of that nature. So that is one tool we have in the UDO to give it some flexibility in the maximum standard. I do think on-street parking would be regulated through the city's right-of-way standards separately outside of the UDO. This being,
I could imagine some developers basically trying to claim it, because there's no place in here that I could find that says thou shalt not use on-street parking as your what you need. So I would be nice somewhere to fit that code in there, that sentence that says thou shalt not count spaces on street parking for what you need. I realize that's implied, but it never really specifically prohibits somebody from trying to make that argument.
Let's just put it in. I see no objection from the planning. Commissioner, or Alderwoman,
Thank you. And I wanted to clarify for myself, the discussions.
I got it.
I just am wondering if the comments from the discussion we had 2 weeks ago had been supplied to them, so they are up to date on some of the discussion that we've had. And I'm going back through the notes from 2 weeks ago, and one of the questions that came up that kind of made some sense to me, particularly in the area of industrial uses, possibly using the number of employees to determine parking as opposed to the square footage of the building. And I'm only thinking in terms of, there's one that pops out into my head, very, very, very large industrial space, but is maybe only going to have 6 to 10 employees. And thoughts on that?
certainly, I think that is a good point and a good transition into what we have here. The notes from the Plan Commission on November 3rd. So the first one here, we did receive the suggestion on having employees for industrial uses as opposed to square footage. We do typically have parking for industrial and employment uses based on the size of the facility or square footage because it's less likely to change over time and it's easier to verify on a site plan or a submittal that an applicant might have rather than employees, which might fluctuate over time. That's the reason we typically go with that standard. There are ways we can differentiate between, say, in an industrial use, areas that are used for office or employment areas rather than storage. We could have a higher rate of parking for an industrial or an office or employment component within that site.
That would be great.
So I'd just like to chime in real quick here with the parking maximum. It's actually one of the great benefits of using a parking maximum is that uses that otherwise would have required much more parking than they really need, like large industrial spaces with few employees. Now they can provide the amount of parking that they need to. So if they know, we only ever really have 10 people here at one time, all we need are those, maybe 10 to 15 spaces, then they can choose to develop those and not meet that maximum or that minimum requirement that the city had previously required of them.
Okay. Okay, Ruben. Just
Certainly.
remember, we've been through most of this already.
Yep. And we had the comment on revising parking space width to 10 as opposed to 9 feet. We're glad to go with that standard if that's the appropriate dimension for Franklin. We got
15 works
the,
better, though. Should see the way some of these people park.
we had adding a provision to allow temporary parking of trucks and equipment of a commercial industrial nature in residential or floodplain or park and open space districts. We can make sure to incorporate an allowance for to allow temporary parking in those districts. We got the comment on adding a provision to allow out of direction travel for the pedestrian circulation due to natural resources, steep slopes, or building orientation. That's another edit we can go ahead and make, although we would add that building orientation we would typically not recommend as having an exception, just because the pedestrian facilities are typically developed sort of with the buildings in coordination with those, and that the idea of the standards is to encourage those to be developed together to have a pedestrian character, to allow that sort of pedestrian character and easy pedestrian travel. So the idea to not allow an exception for building orientation. We got the edit to specify that EV stations would comply with Wisconsin Commercial Building Code and the state's electrical code. That's a provision we can certainly add. There was some concern expressed about charging stations in structured parking. I believe Regulo can perhaps provide more information too, but I believe this has been reviewed with the fire chief, and it's not so much a concern.
Yes. Yeah, Commissioner Butthart has a concern about the electric vehicle charging station in structured parking. So I consulted with the inspection services director and with the fire chief, and their codes do not have any prohibition on the location of electric vehicle charging station. So that concern that is, I will say, resolved.
Okay, thank you. And last we had a note to incentivize, or at least explore an incentive rather than requirement for EV charging stations. And so this is a question we wanted to circle back on, is what would the appropriate incentive be for EV charging stations? We would suggest something like a reduction in fees or more rapid permitting process for uses that provide EV charging stations. But definitely wanted to get the commission's thoughts on that.
Well, I'll give you my initial thought is we can't do a fee reduction. We can't. By policy, we don't do a fee reduction. Expedited processing, probably an option, but I think what we need to do is think about it before we act on it. Commissioner Leone, I'm sorry, Mr. City Engineer.
So I guess my question is, why are we trying to incentivize them? I think it's going to become a natural product of, next 10 to 15 years. People are going to want to put them in regardless for whatever reason. So I think it's just going to happen naturally. I don't know why you should require it per se, or even incentivize it, because it's going to occur naturally.
I kind of agree with that. Commissioner Leone, but I think you pushed your button once too many times. Commissioner Leone. What's the matter with you? There we go. I don't know. Okay. I'm working, but
So I think outside of the type of incentives that were discussed now, perhaps look to the county and state for recognition programs, kind of things where it can be a certificate or a plaque on the wall. This is a green company type thing, something that maybe can put in there so that when companies are promoting the type of green companies that they are, that they can say, see, we got this certificate, whether it's from the city itself or getting them tied into their relevant county or state agencies to get that type of recognition.
let's do this. Let's keep that recommendation noted on the document, and we'll get to it when we get to this at the council level. It's really a council decision anyway. Ruin.
Certainly. We can definitely circle back on EV charging stations as we go. So we'll move down. The second subsection is driveways to Article 5 here. For single family and duplex, new driveway standards to specify a 12-foot maximum width at the property line, specify an allowed width for the garage access drive. That's that purple portion in front of the garage door on the drawing on the right, and allow that back to taper back to the width of the driveway, and to specify the allowable size of parking pads. That's that parking area on the side of the structure there. New regulations keep those 5 feet from the side property line and screened with a 6-foot privacy fence.
Okay, hold on. Mr. City Engineer, and then I'll ask for a motion to suspend.
Quick comment here, single slab and ribbon driveways are not common usage. At least I couldn't find anybody that I knew that knew what they were, even folks here locally in Wisconsin. So make sure we define that somewhere.
Oh, you're asking for a change in terminology.
Change the terminology or define it somewhere, yes.
Is there a motion to suspend the rules, allow Rick Priscilla to speak?
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries.
Mayor. Ruben, Rick Prisbilla, 9244 West Grandview Court. I just have a question from Ruben. In regards to the 12 feet maximum at the property line, being a developer in the city, we have been putting in curb cuts into subdivisions, and the norm has, in our case, has always been 24 feet. I think the city at a minimum, they request 20 feet, and then they can go up to 28 feet. But we've been doing 24 feet for probably 30 years or so. With that in mind, with the city approach guidelines, there has to be a taper of 3 feet on both sides as it tapers into the sidewalk area. With that in mind, at 24 feet minus the 6 feet leaves you with 18 feet rather than the 12 feet. I think 12 feet, and again, speaking as a developer and as a homeowner, I think is very, very, very shallow. There's a lot of people that I know that back up trailers and so forth. I mean, I'm not very good at it, but at 12 feet, I would probably be on my lawn going over. So my suggestion would be to keep what the city has as far as that opening. And Glenn, you can chime on that. Am I misspeaking or?
So I actually asked staff about this today to make sure. So I believe the measurement that we talk about is at the right-of-way line. So the 3 foot and 3 foot, the 6 foot would be in addition to. So I think we allow for 24 at the right-of-way line. So you could have 30 foot at the actually edge of curb because it has to taper out 3 foot on each side.
Okay.
So
Okay.
it doesn't go the other direction. I think, and
But-
maybe this would be perhaps where your diagrams can eliminate the confusion. The measurement is at the right-of-way line, I believe.
But am I misunderstanding the 12 feet by the property line? Then what, after it's flared in?
The property line is what I call the right-of-way line.
Correct.
Your property does not go all the way to the street.
To the curb, it's 15 feet in from there.
12 feet here.
But Ruben, I guess is what I'm asking is after the curb cut, the approach, the concrete that the city requests, when that's flared in and it comes to the front property line, is this standard 12 feet? That you're proposing?
Just an additional comment.
You would have 12 plus 3 plus 3, so that'd be 20 feet at the curb.
I understand that. That's what I'm saying is, but it's only 12 feet at the property line, which is 15 feet beyond the curb, which is the front property line, correct? What the standard
That's
that we're
correct.
doing now, and we've been doing for 30 years, is it's been a 24, again, we've been using 24 as a 24 feet wide, but then it flares into 3 feet on both sides. So if you take 3 feet off the 24, you end up at 18 feet at the front property line and not 12.
Correct. I understood the conversation at the last meeting. I wasn't here, but I thought it was decided to go back to 24 because of all the multi garages on everyone's house.
Yeah, just on that, city engineer. This is the 12 feet maximum from the previous draft, but the decision in the last informative session was to change that maximum to a minimum. So it's a minimum 12
It needs
feet.
to be a minimum 12 foot, so it could be a 24 foot
Right.
plus 3 plus 3.
It could be. So would that then allow 18 feet at the front property line?
Right, because the
Okay.
decision was not a maximum, a minimum 12 feet.
Oh, okay. Okay, good enough. Thank you so much.
I think I would encourage the city to perhaps reconsider the minimum allowance and do establish a maximum. I do think that the 12 feet is a very narrow maximum. That is a very uncommon standard. 20 to 24 feet is much more common, but I do think having a maximum is important so that someone isn't paving over their entire front yard.
I would suggest that we generally catch that because we have a maximum, the ratio on the lot. So generally, that's what prohibits, as I understand, what for the new subdivisions, we'll say you can only have so much maximum of your lot coverage. Generally, that's what makes the driveway skinnier.
So
But potentially on larger lots where they have larger backyards, they are not meeting their coverage because of their larger yard and are still paving over a significant portion of the front yard in a manner that wouldn't create a very nice appearance from the street.
Ms. X.
Yeah, I want to sort of piggyback on what Ms. Wells is saying. So if you consider, for example, street frontage where the front of the house is 100 feet, or I'm sorry, not the front of the house, but the front of the lot is 100 feet, a 30-foot width could be 1/3 of that. So as you're driving along that street wall, consider the visual environment that you're creating. I think there's probably a middle ground that would be appropriate. So, but I do concur that like a maximum would be wise.
So and I appreciate that. So as an example, so I go over to Ryan Meadows subdivision. There's some nice homes over there. There's some that's like three 3 garages basically facing the road. So if it were too skinny, I can't imagine trying to pull in and get around. So I think that'd be tough.
And that's the purpose of the garage access drive. It provides the access to however wide of a garage you would like to have, whether that's a 3-car, a 4-car, you have that available with at the garage doors, and for 20 feet beyond that. So you can park a car in that space. That's plenty of room. So really it's just at the property line, typically at the sidewalk line, having a more uniform, consistent width in driveways to ensure that it's safer for pedestrians, it's more visually appealing for the community.
Could I make one more quick comment? I think it's on the next page, though, is there was on the diagram, you mentioned 16 feet from the front garage door. I think some consideration should be placed as far as some of these pickup trucks. I mean, I just measured a pickup truck, it's 20 feet, almost 20 feet. And, at 16 feet, are you going to expect people to be driving and making a curve to come into their 3rd-car garage with such a long vehicle? So at least consider it. Thank you.
Okay.
That's a very good point, sir. Thank you for bringing that up, that it should be 20 feet, the length of the garage access drive, so that you're able to park the car in front of that garage door if needed. So thank you for bringing up that error or typo on our part.
Thank you.
Motion to return.
Make that motion.
Second.
Morrow and Leon, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Ruben?
Yep, thank you. So we'll be glad to revise that maximum to 20 or 24 feet, or however the city sees that as fitting best within Franklin. So we also do have minimum and maximum width of driveways for one-way driveways and two-way driveways for townhouse and multifamily and non-residential uses. For townhouse uses, one-way driveway would be minimum 9 and maximum of 20. Two-way driveways for townhouses, the range there would be between 20 and 33 feet. Family and non-residential uses, the one-way driveway width is between 9 and 33 feet. For two-way driveways, between 20 and 36 feet. And there's a requirement from the current UDO that they be set back 10 feet from the property line.
So if we're going to be consistent and we say it takes 10 feet to park a car, shouldn't it take 10 feet to drive a car? 10 feet width? So what I'm saying is this minimum width ought to be 10 feet, not 9. And consequently, the next one should be 22 feet, not 20. And similarly, the one below it. Our parking standard is 10 feet parking width.
Mm-hmm.
Matter consistent.
Yes, we can go ahead and make those changes to align with the parking requirement.
And Mr. Prisbilla's pickup truck is probably 10 feet wide. Thanks. Go ahead. Right, Ruben.
Okay. So the feedback from the Plan Commission last time was to add asphalt as an approved material for driveways. I think that is an edit we can make. We'll just have to coordinate with the city engineer on whether that's an appropriate material at the right-of-way line and that at that driveway apron area.
Mr. City.
We install asphalt for the approaches. That's our typical, I guess most subdivisions, I think concrete would look much nicer, but when you're not in a high density subdivision, let me say it that way, I think asphalt would be more than sufficient. But probably some consideration. So when you have tiny homes that are stacked on top of each other, which is how we're going. I think concrete would be more appropriate. And the reason why is it's tough to pave very small areas. So if you've got, not a lot of parking room, speaking of parking, concrete's much easier to install also.
So hearing this discussion, without giving it any thought, whatever, the use of asphalt then probably should be determined based on square footage of the driveway. Now, I'm not sure I'm saying that right, but if you have, in my case, an 80-foot long driveway, the asphalt driveway should be perhaps 100 feet or longer. Discussion, I haven't even thought this through, so.
It's just, I'm sorry.
Alderman Hanneman.
I guess as I'm thinking through as you're talking through this, what are the implications for, particularly in some of our older subdivisions, where not big houses, pretty standard, probably 10, 12-foot driveway, are primarily asphalt. So would that require then, if somebody wanted to redo their driveway, it would ultimately then have to be concrete rather than replacing asphalt? Because then you'd kind of have a legally non-conforming on the asphalt.
Let's let the experts give us a recommendation now that they've heard the two issues.
So if asphalt is allowed currently throughout the city, I would say unless there's a strong desire by the city to move into the direction of only concrete, then I would say carry forward that allowance. That is a potentially difficult conversation for property owners if they come in to pull a permit to get a driveway resurfaced. To go from a concrete to an asphalt to a concrete driveway is there's a big cost associated with that. Concrete is a much more expensive material. So that is definitely a policy decision of the city. That's something you all need to decide whether that's sort of where you want to draw the line in the sand in terms of improving the appearance of the community over time.
So let me suggest this, and the Plan Commission can tell me otherwise. Let's put language in that permits asphalt and let the Common Council decide if they want to make some distinguishing characteristic for length of driveway or available driveway from approach to the end of the driveway.
It's also possible for the city to consider saying existing driveways can continue to be surfaced with asphalt if they are surfaced with asphalt today or at the time of the adoption of the UDO. But future driveways, new construction, those would need to be concrete. So that is one way of approaching it and kind of perhaps win-win approach.
So my request for you on that, for Housea Levine, is to give us that language too, bracket it or label it as optional or something like that. Alderman Hanneman.
I was just going to say what she said for anything pre-existing.
Sure.
I would qualify that.
Hold on.
Here, just
I would further qualify that maybe with residential type, especially some of our more rural homes that have particularly long driveways. I think that would be pretty onerous to require, and probably not appropriate, I think, to require a concrete drive. So maybe kind of make that distinction between residential type.
Yeah, certainly. I think that's a great point. So I think that the best approach would be for us to draft perhaps a couple of options, a couple of ways of regulating driveway materials. Perhaps one is based on what kind of zoning district you're in. So the more rural residential or low density residential, one that's pre-existing versus new, and then another that is based on length. And we can maybe see where the right approach is for the city.
Okay, great.
Glenn.
I would also remind Common Council that it's not uncommon for someone with a concrete driveway, once it becomes so broken up, it's a lot easier to fix it by surfacing it with asphalt. instead of having to completely tear out and replace it. So just it's a huge expense for folks to tear out a concrete driveway.
Okay, let's keep going.
Great. We can draft those different options. So getting into landscape standards, the next subsection, the text in the ordinance is really based on the city's existing standards. The main ideas here are to require buffer yards between lots and adjacent zoning districts, integrate stormwater management features into the required landscape areas and buffer yards, specify the allowed planting size and requirements for planting per land use, and encourage preservation of existing healthy vegetation and allow that to substitute for other landscape requirements. So the feedback
Let-
from last time,
Let-
yes.
Glenn?
So I actually had one more comment related to the drive, but it's right above the landscaping. So in F, edge barrier required. So I guess the transition between landscaping and driveway. Say the edge barrier may be interrupted where necessary to provide for stormwater inflows. I think I would say flows because most of the time it'd be outflows that you would be trying to get water away from the pavement.
Okay.
Maybe just say flows.
Okay, back to you, Ruben.
Thank you. So the feedback we heard from last time on the landscape standards is first to include tamarack trees within the definition of evergreen trees that are required in that section. And we got comment back from JB and she's, I think, okay with that change. So we can go. Second, specify that landscape plans be prepared by a professional landscape architect or landscape designer. That also is a change we can go ahead and make. We also had a comment on the driving hazard provision, the last provision in that section, I think. And that provision is there just to prevent driving hazards, and it really applies to landscaping, any landscaping in a parking lot, to have the first 6 feet of a tree cleared and to limit clear of branches and vegetation, and to limit the height of shrubs to 3 feet. That just as a safety precaution. And it really does apply to all landscaping within a parking lot. So did the commission have any other comments or questions on the landscape standards?
I do. Landscaping, and I think you actually cover it later, but it's in the vision triangles. We do have different vision triangles depending on what kind of street it is. I think at least it appeared that you're just assuming that all streets have the same setback. It is nice that you have a setback for driveways, but then we have a different setback for collectors and arterials than we do local streets. So just keep that in mind for the vision triangle that you're driving hazards.
Okay, so we'd want to keep that differentiation.
I believe it's 60 for our collectors and arterials and 30 for residential.
Yep, that's correct.
Okay. If there's no other comments on the landscape standards, we'll go ahead and keep moving into screening here. New screening standards we have to screen certain site features, grease traps, trash and recycling receptacles is the first subsection within there. Ground and wall mounted mechanical units to require screening from off-site for these site features. Roof mounted mechanical units and loading docks and truck parking areas. So we had to go over the comment from last time. There was a comment that grease traps, trash, and recycling receptacles should not be visible from public streets. There is some concern that that could be a real imposition for different commercial sites, and it could generate a lot of non-conforming aspects of those sites and be sort of burdensome to future applicants that want to install these features. So we would recommend keeping the screening requirements in as they're drafted, or to add some language at the most to state a preference that the enclosure a public right of way, but we do think it would be fairly burdensome to require that.
Okay, I'm going to respectfully disagree. And as I think about what's going on in the city for business, I don't know of one that's visible from the street. Could be wrong, but in the movie picture that is my brain,
guess
but I would suggest this is a little onerous. Let's do visible from primary public streets, or whatever the main street is. As if they're on a corner, you know. Regular.
No, because the current UDO requires a screening for any trash receptacle. So the screening is visible, but not the trash receptacles. That's, yeah.
Thanks. Follow up on that comment about we don't really have that in the city. Have you driven 27th Street lately and seen the trash receptacles that are lined literally along 27th Street?
Actually, I was doing the west side of the city, but does that highlight my point that they ought to be?
They ought to be, definitely.
And
But enforcement's a little bit of an issue. I mean, definitely going forward, I would want to require that. But, you know, then again, we come back into balancing the nonconformers and how do we enforce that when we've got so many already?
And I'm getting that
My
look from
understanding is that this,
I'm getting that look from Commissioner Leone that, you know, are you out of your minds? So Commissioner Leone. Go ahead. Oh, why is that on over here? Go ahead.
So I think that the consultants and Mr. Martinez covered it well. Screening covers what we're looking for here. Probably some look at what the standards are for screening. From what I saw, they look appropriate. But when you look across the entirety of the city, I think that the challenges that the consultants are discussing are real and will give some of our industrial and commercial properties some challenges. So, yeah, I would be in favor of screening, not something where it has to be completely out of sight to include said screening.
Aaron?
Thank you, Mayor. I can think of several examples in the city where there is a visible trash enclosure from a main street. In most cases, it is either a corner lot or a double frontage property. So those might be appropriate exceptions, but I would be interested if the consultants maybe want to kind of workshop some language for that and then come up with some possible exceptions if the site absolutely does not allow for a siting where you can't hide the trash enclosure.
Yeah, that, as you remember, that was my suggestion, that we do primary street or the technical terms that you bring in. But This is an aesthetic and raise the level of appearance in your community kind of thing. Where we really have to ask ourselves, do we really want trash enclosures visible from the street? My suggestion is no, but then we're dealing with the non-conforming. I get it. So anyway, Marion.
I would caution against using street classification, like if it's arterial, et cetera, because if you're allowing a lower classification of street to have enclosures facing them, that could potentially be a residential street, so. No, but, well, you were suggesting that street classification possibly be a criteria, so you could then create a situation where a double frontage lot with a lower class street then has residential across that is looking at trash enclosures. So if that's,
For the record, that's not my intention.
right. So I'd be interested to hear the feedback from the consultants, but that's my analysis.
I think the best way to ensure that there's enough flexibility in the ordinance to accommodate whatever type of situation that may pop up in the future is to require that grease traps, trash, and recycling receptacles be, and the required screening thereof, not be visible from the public right-of-way unless site conditions make that impossible. And then it can be approved administratively. So they're not required to get some sort of special approval by any elected or appointed body. But staff is able to, look at their lot and say, yeah, that it really is going to be impossible to get it to be located somewhere that's not visible at all from the public right of way. Let's find the best location for it.
Okay.
I think that would be a good.
We did 10 minutes on that, and that's an acceptable compromise. Okay, Ruben.
Okay. Sounds like we have the idea there. So fencing standards, we have revised this article to specify allowable materials, fences in street side yards. That's the street facing side yard of the house. They're allowed to be a maximum of 6 feet in height and 100% opaque if they're located a minimum of 5 feet from the property line. And that's to make sure that there's not sort of opaque wall next to a sidewalk or next to a given street. So the feedback we heard from last time from the Plan Commission is that chain link should be a prohibited material. And we can go ahead and make that edit. We'd like to ask, though, whether that should be differentiated between front yards, exterior side yards, the street-facing side yards, or versus interior rear yards. Are there places on a residential site where chain link could be appropriate?
I don't know. You're thinking about families with dogs.
Yeah.
Give us some language that will permit chain link fences in the rear yards of residential, and we'll let the council determine that.
I think that is, I'm sorry. I think in more recent times, that's being pretty well policed by homeowner groups, different neighborhoods. It's in the covenants for no fencing and things like that. I guess my personal observation anecdotally is that chain link fences are sort of falling out of favor, at least in smaller properties, but in the main subdivisions, I just don't see them happening anymore because their neighborhood covenants don't allow them.
And dog collars.
Well, yeah, a lot of people use those.
But still, let's give the council the opportunity.
That's fine.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, we'll draft some language to allow chain link in rear yards along the rear property line only.
Yeah, all right.
Um,
And then Commissioner Leon.
Thank you, Mayor. I believe we did not address this in the draft, and I will note that staff has had to review a couple of different requests related to the electrical underground fences and whether that's considered a fence or not. The UDO, as it exists, doesn't have any standards, so maybe just define it as not a fence because it's underground.
Any objections from the Plan Commission? This is invisible dog fences. I don't see them as fences, so.
I don't know.
All right, so can you give us some language that invisible animal containment fences are invisible, therefore they're not a fence?
Certainly, we can include in the definition of fence that those types of fences are not included.
Okay, Commissioner Leon, then City Engineer.
So I'll qualify my next question by, I think property owners should be able to put up chain link fences if they want to. It's their property. That said, I understand the intent here, but Ruben, when you were talking about the back property line, I think it's got to be not just the back line, but the side part so that they can enclose a backyard. So I'm thinking of, it goes from the back of their house, side property, all the way up so that if they have pets or children for that matter, that they want to be able to play safely with a chain link fence that it still allow. So I just wanted to clarify what we mean by back property line.
So
Okay.
what you're saying is the rear of the principal structure, lot line to lot line.
Yes. And I think what you just said would include, like, if they wanted to go from the house, the structure, to the lot line and then create a box. Okay. Thank you.
Correct. Yeah, the rear yard is defined in the area between the rear property line and the back of the house. So all that area.
Okay. So the side portion would be included as well. Okay. Thank you for clarifying.
So 2 comments. We skimmed by the invisible fence. If we're going to mention it, I'd like to make sure that we make the same caveats that we do with sprinkler systems, because we run into this all the time where they try to install them in the public right of way. They do not belong at all in the public right of way. So they can put them in their front yard, which is fine, but they need to keep them out of my right of way. The other question.
Don't come to my house.
What's that? Landscape standard? I don't know. I heard invisible fence mentioned it. If you mention it, make sure you put the caveat they shall not be in public right of way. Don't tell me what you got there.
You have to go find it.
The other one is my biggest issue. Now, I don't know if, and maybe there might be another section where you're going to be talking about retaining walls. But it's come to our attention recently that we paid more attention and more standards on fences and repair of, keeping of good repair of fences. Retaining walls, we really don't say anything. There's only one spot where I talk about retaining walls where anything over 3 feet needs to have a professional engineer design it, but people build whatever and then they let them fall down and neighbors complain, and I really don't have the enforcement capability, or no one has the enforcement capability to make someone keep it in good repair. So I think, is that a different section, or should this be the proper place to put that? It really doesn't fit anything, but you mentioned walls in this section, so I think it might be appropriate to mention retaining walls here.
I think that is something that is missing from the draft currently. I don't know if it necessarily fits in with fencing standards. It may be just a new section in Article 5, all about retaining walls specifically.
Yep.
We can certainly get that drafted and added into the next version of this chapter that you see.
Okay, without this sounding the way it's going to sound, moving on. Next.
Okay, great. Moving into design standards. So these are architectural standards for townhouses, multifamily, mixed use, and non-residential development only. Specified standards for exterior building cladding materials, facade articulation, and glazing windows. So city staff worked and determined how these new standards would affect recent developments. So these Knollwood apartments here, the front facade did pass as it's greater percentage of masonry, lower percentage of lap siding, and almost no concrete. The rear facade did not pass as it's got a relatively large share of metal siding comprised by the garage doors there. Also, the front facade of this development here, Velo Village, did not pass due to the large proportion of lap siding. So that test just does show that these standards would control for things that have happened in Franklin recently. So the feedback from last time is to specify that the design requirements apply for residential uses in the multifamily residential district as opposed to other residential districts. I think that's a fine edit we can make. That's really where the multifamily uses are. And we also had a comment to add requirements for roofline articulation into the design standards, and wondered what the commission sees as the appropriate regulations for roofline articulation being. Is there a certain appearance that would be most appropriate?
This is where the mayor steps in and says, that's what we pay you for.
We're asking
Oh,
if
no,
there
that's
is,
not fair. let me give you some guidance. The
is
purpose
there
of-
a recent development that was something that should be modeled after? Something that you think looks really great that we want future multifamily to look like?
if I thought about it and took some pictures, that would be more helpful. But
Certainly.
it's obviously to break up a roof line that is the length of the building.
Yeah, so I think if you all maybe think on that a little bit on examples of recent multifamily development or just examples of multifamily development in general that you think is a nice appearance, we can take a look and see what those standards may be to achieve a similar standard for that, to achieve that appearance.
Okay, it's not going to happen tonight, though.
Certainly not.
Thank you.
If there's any examples you do have, we'd be glad to take a look at those.
Right.
So for outdoor lighting, we have new standards proposed for LED to require LED fixtures, to regulate pole-mounted outdoor lighting and wall-mounted outdoor lighting, prohibit outline lighting, limit light trespass at the property line, and specify light level measurement. Those are the new standards in this section.
I have just a small concern about the term outline lighting. And probably want to define that better.
Yep, we'll be sure to add a definition in the later articles to show which part of what exactly that's referencing, what type of features.
I would like to make an exception of the lighting standard at the property line for folks whose intention is to light the street. We've had folks that want to basically put a street light out front, but they can't put it in the right of way, or because, well, I don't want to pay for it because it really doesn't meet any of our standards. But if they wanted to put a light out there to really act as a street light and run off their meter, I'd be fine with that. And they really wanted a light. So we ran into that problem because that's really the intention of a street light, is to light the street. But if they were to put it on their own property, they could basically run off their meter, and it's no cost to the city. And I'm okay with them putting it there. It's just it doesn't meet my standards, and I don't see it's worth the city paying for it. But if say a apartment complex or whatever wanted to have a special light for them, so people could turn into theirs, that I would be fine with that.
Commissioner Leon?
question really would be to the city engineer, should there be a distance from that property? Now, it can't be extend so far that it's disruption to neighbors or whatever. So, the 3 feet from the property line, some of the stuff that we talked about, the driveways, whatever is an appropriate distance so you don't get a floodlight that's lighting up and causing issues.
So I would suggest to you that the examples I'm thinking of are places that historically people put streetlights up just because an alderman wanted to put a streetlight up. And we've tried to be more selective about where we put them up because we want to, basically, because we pay monthly fees for those. The ones I'm thinking of are really, so like on Forest Hill, when you turn south, there's several, I want to say condo developments and so forth. That wouldn't bother me. A street light is a street light, which is fine. I just didn't want to pay for it because it doesn't meet my standards. But, maybe that would be part of the plan review process where we would have to use judgment. Would a street light in this location flood out, say, some residential houses across the street or something?
Let me ask, and I'm sure there is a standard for streetlights, but basically, if it meets the same standards as a streetlight does as far as how far it projects out lighting.
Yeah, and especially now with LED lights, you can actually, you aim them, just so this area, it doesn't do everything, so.
Yeah, so I guess that's what I would suggest is everything you said, just ensure that it meets the same standards of a street light as far as how far it projects out said light.
Yeah, I think I agree with the city engineer that having the ability to decide on a case-by-case basis whether it is appropriate or not to have that type of street lighting on private property would be something great to add to this section. So we can go ahead and draft some language that would allow the city on a case-by-case basis to determine whether that type of lighting is appropriate to be approved.
And for what it's worth, so a private individual cannot put a street light in the right of way. So.
Correct.
Mm-hmm.
Maren?
I want to ask some clarifying questions because I can picture what you're describing, but I can't exactly picture where. So what's the context? Are we talking about a street where there is no city-provided streetlights to begin with?
So we will put streetlights at intersections and basically into cul-de-sacs sometimes. But say, imagine a street where mid-block someone has a large apartment complex. It's not a city intersection, but they want it to function like an intersection because they have a lot of people come in and out, with their large commercial driveway. The idea is that they could basically put something that looks like a street light. It would be on private property, but it would run off their meter.
Sure. So I think some of the criteria here would be that if it encroaches into, like, the standard right now is the property line. We could make an exception related to the right-of-way.
So an exception would be that they could exceed the lighting standards at the property line if they're
At the right-of-way property line.
Yeah, if it looks, tastes, and smells like a street light, I would be okay with it.
Okay, so don't come into my neighborhood because the design standards issued by the developer were that you put up a post light suitable to illuminate the nearby driveway and street.
So as an example, there's a condo development or duplex development. They have been to the Board of Public Works several times here in the past year and a half asking for a street light. So we had to decide, does the city indeed want to add extra street lights in a place that we wouldn't ordinarily put it? If this were in place, we could say, yes, you condo development can put up your own street light. Just make sure that the base is on your private property and you run it off your meters, and we're okay with that. So it probably wouldn't apply to your neighborhood because you're all single-family homes, but I would suggest to you that would be appropriate.
So my suggestion for this condominium association, were they to come to me, I said, sure, we will license you to put up the street light just exactly like the city would put up the street light, but it's at your expense, including operation. And that fixes the problem, right?
Well, that's been the discussion.
And you're getting at my point, that's where I talk about the same standards that the city uses in terms of how far out it illuminates, so it's not disruption to others in the neighborhood. So I would add that in there, that it's got to go with those same standards as far as how far the light goes out.
All right, did we get that one? I don't think we got to where I wanted to be, but, okay.
Yep, I think we understand. We can
You're a better
Make it
man than I,
draft.
Ruben. Go ahead.
We're still on lighting. I was going to move on to bring up a different topic, but if we're still on lighting, that's okay. I'll wait.
Yeah, so last time the feedback we heard is to adjust the lighting height in the BSM district to 15 feet to match the area's street lighting. So that's a change we can go ahead and make, but definitely if Alderwoman Hanneman has, was there anything else you wanted to bring up?
Nope, next subject. Why don't you just go ahead?
Thanks. I'm wondering if this might be the appropriate place to add in a section. And I'd also like the consultant's thoughts or expertise if in other UDOs that you've worked on, are there sections on sound amplification from properties?
So noise is often something that is regulated outside of a UDO. And I know currently the city of Franklin has noise regulations in both their UDO and in your municipal code. And in previous conversations with city staff, there was a desire to eliminate those standards from the UDO and keep the ones that are in the municipal code, as that is more so enforced by police rather than code enforcement people. So it just makes more sense for that type of violation to be enforced by police.
Okay,
What Marion would like to.
Marion.
To respond to maybe the request that the core of this, perhaps a requirement related to commercial development that has amplified music, that they provide some kind of sound analysis. Is that could be related to site plan review and the administrative procedures. So we're going to be getting to that in a future session. So.
Yep, that's something we can work into the application process.
Okay, moving on.
Okay, next topic, vision clearance area. This is for the intersection of two streets and now for the intersection of street and a driveway to keep that area clear for motorists or pedestrians and limit the height of vegetation and other structures in that area. So we did get the comment earlier that we want to keep the differentiation based on the type of street that the city does currently have. But certainly if there's any other comments here.
Nope.
Okay, great. So from here, we'll move into Article 6. This is sign standards, just regulations on signage throughout the city. There's 9 different subsections.
Mayor?
Commissioner Leon, and I think we can pass on the overview slide.
Okay.
Commissioner Leon.
And to your point, I have 30 minutes before I need to leave, and I think when I depart, we will go below quorum. So I just want to ensure that we know that I have a meeting that I have to be at, so I need to leave at 8:45.
So Ruben, that means go into third and fourth gears, please.
Why don't we just skip right to the slides that are highlighting the feedback that we've heard from the Planning Commission from that first meeting?
Yep.
Since you all are already familiar with all of this, we can just make sure we understand your feedback correctly and can go from there.
Okay, one second. Go ahead.
And again, I apologize, I wasn't
This-
at the last meeting.
This
but-
comment's fine. We can
So
incorporate that.
I've got a big concern regarding signage, specifically signage that looks and tastes like street signs. So specifically stop signs, we have a lot of folks that, or a lot of developments. So technically, the stop sign is not required. In fact, a police officer will not issue a citation if someone runs a stop sign, say leaving a parking lot into a street unless they do it unsafely. However, I would like to see us make sure that we put things there, stop signs specifically. And there's specifically a situation that came up where it was a private street and the homeowners association fought us on putting up a stop sign because it wasn't required. It looks, tastes, and feels like a public street, but it's a private street. So technically they didn't have to put up a stop sign. So I want to make sure we can discuss that. And we can discuss that later if you have questions, but that's the intent of trying to make sure we put up those kinds of signs.
So I'm sorry, to clarify, is the desire to allow for stop signs that aren't, legal stop signs to be put up on private property, or to not allow them?
To require them.
To require them. So as a part of parking lot circulation, essentially.
Well, not only parking lots, but then private roads.
Okay, so the private roadway, that would be in the subdivision standard, so we can certainly incorporate that requirement there. And then in the parking lots, we could include a requirement for parking depending on the length of the drive aisles.
Great. Okay.
Okay. So I'll skip right to our comments. First was that feather signs should be prohibited in Franklin. We had them included in the draft as allowed temporary signs with some parameters around area and height. But we did hear last time that they should be prohibited in the city. So just wanted to make sure we understood that correctly.
Understanding I'm the one who has to leave early. Can somebody explain to me what a feather sign is?
It's
It's the sign that's shown here on the screen.
Right, but I can you give me an example of what one looks like is there one in Franklin?
I think there are, but
Oh.
it waves at you.
Oh,
Car dealers.
okay. All right,
It's a
thank you.
lot-
That
yeah.
helps.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, they're activated by the wind.
Got it. Yeah, thank you.
Anybody object to prohibiting? Nope.
I don't have an issue with it, but I would go with the commission's recommendation.
Okay.
Okay, so we'll add that to the list of prohibited signs. On prohibited content, we had a list of text or graphics that just a different set of text and graphics here that would be prohibited content. And we heard last time that there's some concern over conflict with the First Amendment and freedom of speech. We do have some case law there that would establish this as these regulations would essentially hold up under case law as they're written now. And
Okay,
we're glad
Ruben.
to.
So
Yes, sir.
the solution to that is send staff the case law, unless you've already got it, and we'll get it over to the city attorney for review.
Okay.
Yep, we're certainly glad to provide that.
Okay, good, thanks.
And last, I believe we had a comment that the provision under safety, maintenance, and abandonment, that all signs be maintained in compliance with the applicable codes of the city, that some reference be made to the penalties section of the ordinance. And I believe we can do that.
Okay.
That is the comments that we had on signs from last time. We're glad to go back over any of it or go over any other questions on signs if there are any from the commission.
Just that the city attorney's working on the First Amendment issues, and we'll have a report for us.
Okay, great.
That,
So,
Ruben, go ahead.
yep, we'll just end here with next steps. Next, we have several other draft sections of the UDO coming. Natural resources is in the works. But largely from here, we go into planned unit development standards, subdivision standards, administration and procedures, and last nonconformities and definitions. So Articles 8, 9, and 10 are some of the major ones there that are focused on the UDO processes and procedures there. So we're in discussing dates to for those articles with staff now.
Okay, great. Regular, anything else?
Yeah, just to add, the anticipated timeline for the next workshop will be January next year.
Okay,
Committee of the Whole on February 2nd, as suggested by Common Council.
okay. Commissioner Leon?
So we clearly have a member of the public who wants to speak. I do believe I understand what you want to discuss. I do believe that we are going to be discussing sound at a later meeting, correct? So always looking for, and tonight we've already broken, what's the right term? Suspended the rules. So understanding that there is going to be another opportunity to talk about noise. I make a motion that we suspend the rules so that Ms.
Gint.
Gint has the opportunity to speak tonight.
Is there a second? Second by Alderman Henneman. All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Briefly, Dana.
Sure. Dana Gint, 9011 West Hawthorne Lane. And clearly, I'm here to discuss the design standards and development standards related to outdoor acoustic systems, because outdoor nuisance noise is more impactful than grease trap, screening, lighting, parking. It's more impactful. It's harmful. The World Health Organization ranks it as the second most hazardous pollution. And clearly, there has to be some sort of standard established with outdoor acoustic systems. Commissioner Leon expressed concern about overflow of light across disturbing neighbors. The noise goes for miles around this facility. It's not for a weekend civic celebration. It is for 120 events this year. And at least 10, I believe, were unpermitted. And last year, there was 130 events. The year before that was 145.
Give us suggested language. We're not here to discuss a particular.
There just needs to be language established that the noise does not cross the property boundary. It's a simple, I mean, so I need to understand, like, there was some discussion that the UDO standard would be removed regarding noise, which is 15-31107. So what decibel level would be established if you just follow municipal code? Because municipal code 183 just expressed that there will be it prohibits a noise from being disruptive. So please explain to me what would be the definition of being disruptive to a neighbor? Because if it's a noise that crosses the property boundary, which is the definition of 18340, I believe, is that the what you're going to enforce at the Rock Sports Complex?
We're talking about the Unified Development Ordinance, not a particular development. Talking about changes to the ordinance.
Right.
Do you have any suggested wording that we could?
Well, of course, I'm not a sound expert, but I would think the sound should not be disruptive across into other zoning districts. I mean, if it's commercial to commercial and there's a bar that has outdoor, like the Root River has outdoor bar, volleyball games and things like that, but it's next to another commercial facility, as opposed to this, is a 4,000 person stadium. Where is something like this anywhere else in southeastern Wisconsin that's right next to, butting right up to residential homes? There has to be something done because clearly this is an ongoing problem. Even Mayor Olson in his letter, and
Talking about it. Is there a motion to return to the regular order of business?
When are we going to be talking about noise as part of this process?
Mary?
Well, oh, no, go ahead, go ahead.
So the municipal code is not on deck this evening, and I would put to you that it's not within the scope of what's before the consultants that we're working with this evening. So unfortunately, this procedure isn't going to be the right forum for establishing those standards. What I suggested earlier, which has not been previously required and will only apply to future development, is that during the site plan review process, a sound study be required for any outdoor or commercial development that has audible outdoor amplification.
right, Marion, I don't know how long you've been here, but the approval of the Rock Sports Complex in 2016 did require a comprehensive outdoor sound study. It was not accomplished. It has not been done yet. The county is actually in the process of doing one. But there clearly has to be some sort of standards established. The planning manager in 2020, the November 23rd plan report indicated that the noise was a problem about not properly being designed. It was a design problem. It's stated right in the report. So clearly it needs to be included in design and development standards. That's what I'm asking for. And it needs to be retroactive because there was no process. The Planning Commission didn't even see any drawings related to the speaker system.
So it's very difficult to retroactively apply a new regulation. And I would note that it would probably require amending the scope of this current contract and process. So that is a question for Common Council. This body does not have that ability.
But you are reviewing the UDO, is that correct? And the UDO does include the noise ordinance 15-31107. So is that part of the discussion? I noticed you mentioned the municipal code, which is 183-40 and 178 for public nuisances, which is what this is. There's 5 check marks that you could just check off easily that this is a public nuisance. Even Mayor Olson's letter in September 19, 2020 indicated that this was a nuisance. It's in the letter to the developer twice. So it is a nuisance.
Again, this is a discussion about the Unified Development Orders. If you've got some language for us, we'll be happy to discuss it and see if we can find a place to appropriately put it. But we're not here to discuss past history or development, specific development. So if you got language, give it to us. If not, I'd look for a motion to return. Alderwoman Hanneman.
I'll move to return to regular session.
Second.
Aye.
Motion carries. Go ahead.
I guess the intent of what I brought up earlier was to ask for the consultant's expert opinion on how that is handled in a UDO, if they've ever seen that handled in a UDO, if they've ever had any language to that, or is that something that it would be completely germane to Franklin if we were to come up with language?
It certainly would not. Noise is something that is regulated in a UDO frequently, but what we are noticing in the Franklin Code is that it's regulated in 2 different places, and that can be troublesome and more difficult to enforce. And in previous discussions with staff and with the city, we had determined that the municipal code would be the most appropriate place to have those standards, but it is certainly up to the council, to the commission, where it may be most appropriate to locate them. It is common to have it in one or the other, just not both.
But not both. All right, thank you.
Regular, where we at?
Yep, we're
That's it?
done.
Is there a motion to adjourn? Motion's been made and seconded. All those in favor?
I'm going to say nay on this because we do have another member of the public who speaks. So obviously we can go to this vote, but I would ask if we could at first suspend the rules for another member of the public to speak.
Briefly.
But we have a motion on the floor, so we need to address that.
On the motion, all those in favor to adjourn, signify by saying aye. Aye. Motion dies due to majority.
I make a motion that we suspend the rules to allow Ms. Davis to speak.
Leon and Hanneman, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Debbie Davis, 9460 South 96th Street. My one question and request is you talked about the next steps, to talk about the next chapters, and if we could know, while you're talking to staff, a date in which public can also comment on the upcoming chapters that you'll be discussing.
Certainly.
Yep. In the next step of after the workshop that we will have in January, according to the schedule, we have a public open house and public hearings.
Yep.
We don't have a date yet, but we will have that in the schedule.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Just for the record, Alderman Hanneman moved and Leon seconded, return to order. Okay. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Leon and Hanneman, all those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries.
Thank you, Ruby and Jackie.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great evening.
Thank you, everyone.
Should I log you out, or do you need to do something?
Thank you.
Thanks for playing.
Have a good night.